Regulation MA is wrapping up, and everyone's asking, can Reg MB actually fix this? Over the past weeks, we've been doing these meta-analysis videos, and of course it's kind of weird to do just a meta-analysis when the format is basically ending. You still have a few days to hit champion tier if that's what you're after, but NAIC, which is wrapping up basically tomorrow, but we have like 99% of the results now, has still shifted things. And I think if Reg MA lasted a little longer, a lot of people wouldn't actually be all that stoked. A lot of people are having some concerns with the format and are actually wondering if MB, the next format, can even fix those concerns. So this is what we had last week. We had like Pixie Zard, so like a fairy with Charizard or Charizard solo as like the two best teams together with Fluid Balance. Then in the A tier, right below it, we had these Frostlass, Sneasler, Kangambit teams, which were now starting to run Scoville and Lycanroc. And in B, we had like Gengar, Perish, Sand, Rain. Now that we look at NAIC, the top 8 had 6 out of 8 Zard Wise, 3 out of 8 Floette, and a single Frostlass with the Lycanroc. We have the same meta as before, but we've just removed the B. And everything else is virtually gone. That being said, one thing we can notice is the return of these friends. Japan and Turin mostly showed us this big 6 with Zard Y and Floette, but now at NAIC, suddenly a bunch of pros decided, no, we're actually going right back to the Aerodactyl variant, but with a Farigiraf. Now looking at the trends in day 2, the top 12 Pokemon, Kangambit was sitting at 70%, which is a very concerning number. That is going beyond Fluttermane. That is going beyond some of the best mons of all time in their given formats. Kangambit is like an insane threat, but Sneasler with 54% and Basque with 52%, those aren't super healthy numbers necessarily either. We've seen this whole top row do well before, obviously. But these numbers are getting like more centralized every single week. And so again, going back, is this something that you need to fix, and can MB do it? Now the next hot trend is my band AAA Void. We're releasing a new song in 2.5 weeks, so pre-save it on Spotify, link in the description. Now the talk of the weekend was definitely Wolf with his really interesting take on Zard. If you see this, you go, oh, it's another Charizard team, okay. But then you look at the other mons, we see Hydreigon, Mamoswine, Toxapex, and these are like not very often seen mons, especially those last two. But Toxapex is actually really interesting right now, because if you look at the best two megas, it's Zard and Floette, and Toxapex walls both. It's poison for the fairy, water for the fire, and importantly, it's a water that doesn't get nuked by Solar Beam because of that poison typing. So it messes with those two. It messes with Sylveon as well. It messes with Sneasler because of the poison typing. And importantly, it's not just the typing. You notice the Aerodactyl on here. This thing gets Wide Guard, and with so many mons in the format clicking both Rock Slide and Heat Wave, Wide Guard is extremely strong. You also get to stop Earthquake and Hyper Voice and Dazzling Gleam. And especially in a Zard Y team, where you are afraid of those Rock Slides, being able to just go like Zard Y is not being hit by Rock Slide, your Garchomp is no longer one-shotting me or getting close to one-shotting me, cool, now I can just click my moves. The Mamoswine is also pretty interesting. I'm calling it a fairy ice-eating Walmart Garchomp, because if you look at this team, you think, oh, this is a Zard Y team. Garchomp is a pretty good partner for it. But how are you running Garchomp when you're already running Hydreigon? Your Hydreigon is afraid of fairy and ice type, and then you're adding your Garchomp to that, and it's just the same thing again. Mamoswine also lets you click Earthquake next to your flying Charizard, or maybe next to your Hydreigon, but you're not really fearing the fairy and the ice quite as much, and opposing Garchomp can also get nuked by your ice moves. So definitely an interesting tech. Speaking of interesting techs, we also saw Ceruledge doing really well. We had one in top 8, played by Dawe, and then also one in top 16, played by Dylan Matthews. I first kinda didn't really believe in this mon, but then I saw Dawe playing it and I was like, holy shit, how did I miss that? It was Charizard and Floette, obviously, because it's fire, but then it also was Sneasler because it's Ghost. And then finally, Basque Legion is often this like endgame last respect piece, and you can literally have done bulk up and then just shadow sneak it to sleep. You can also play it next to your Sinistcha, so you can redirect some Basque Legion stuff and then just take it out that way. So overall, Ceruledge is like really well positioned into some of the best threats right now. Of course, you need to be very afraid of Kangambit, but then again, you place this next to a Sinistcha, and then you can just blow up Kangambit with fire. So overall, very interesting mon, and I was very sad to see how Dawe basically only lost because of like crits, which is something this team kind of invites because you're spending time setting up, but still, yeah, Cerelich kind of goated. Now, the cook of the week is, of course, this interesting team by Chris Large playing Blastoise Gardevoir. However, a friend of mine said, hey, isn't this basically just Delphox Floette? And I looked closer and it's like, yeah, this is just Delphox Floette. Because you're playing Instant Sneasler Sinistcha, the balance score, and then you have this one fairy which sets up with Calm Mind and then clicks like a spread move, and then you have this one other BS setup thing that's done fast because of Shell Smash, and then just starts clicking Water Spout. So even though this looks like a cook, that's why I'm saying cook of the week, and it definitely is, don't get me wrong, it's kind of still just the Delphox Floette team. It is really sick though. I am stoked to see this. I really like Blastoise, even though I don't think it's like the strongest mon of the format, nowhere near. It is just really cool. So we look at the format, alright, just a bunch of Zard and Floette with like one Froslass sneaking in. The format is basically the same as before, but we've removed all the weak teams. The format is completely solved around these two, and then maybe you have a little chance with your Froslass, Sneasler, King Gambit stuff. The question is, can Reg MB fix this meta? We are getting in like 3 or 4 days, and the only thing we know so far, by the way, is that we're getting these 2 Raichus. Of course, with the developer interview, we do know that we can expect new mons / new items, so it's not like we're just going to get these. But still, what can they possibly add to actually address this? Because if you look at this, obviously this meta is extremely centralized around some very strong mons. But you can say that about every meta. You know, there's always going to be something that's strongest. That doesn't necessarily have to be bad. What's really the problem with this format, according to lots of people's opinions I've been reading online, is that it's centralized around some very strong mons in an otherwise low power format. So like a first format should usually be something weaker, you know, a national dex with a couple mons. You're really just like getting a feel for the new mechanics and so forth. But instead we got that weak format with not many mons, no legendaries, nothing like that. And then they just have like these couple war criminals dropped in between. And so that's why you get that 70% on some of these, you know, 70, 54, 52 on some of these crazy mons, because they're just so much better. Like, why would you ever run another water when Basque is right there? I mean, except for Mylodic. Mylodic kind of goated. You know, why would you ever run any of these mons in these types when these are just so much better than the others? And the next issue, which I think is actually maybe the bigger issue with the format, is that a lot of these mons are very RNG heavy. So when you have been watching the stream of NAIC this weekend, there were so many games of incredible players who were playing incredible, by the way. And these were games that you were like, oh my god, edge of my seat, this is so exciting, I want to see where these plays lead. And then the games were just like, meh, ruined by RNG. Like constantly, just so many games where people got robbed, and it's just like, you know, you're happy for the person who wins, but you're also kind of feeling like, you know, this would have been a greater match if we could have seen it play out without all the variants. You can kind of say that's Pokemon, but some mons kind of like push it further. And so some examples of that is like the Rock Slide flinches, you know, from Garchomp, Aerodactyl, Lycanroc. The Heat Wave misses from Charizard and Delphox. And you're clicking Heat Wave a lot, and it's doing a lot of damage, so missing it matters a lot. Also, anytime like King Gambit is in an endgame, it's probably going to be like a Sucker Punch 50-50, which is also, you know, are you good because you're winning coin flips? Like, it doesn't feel that great. Team preview, mega choice gambling. Because so many teams have 2 different megas, and so 2 different modes, and those modes counter the modes that your opponent has access to. Very often, you're kind of just gambling like, alright, I'm bringing this mega, and I hope they bring this one, and if they bring the other one, I lose, but I could do the opposite, and then I win. And then you see, like, the leads, and you go, ah. So that's, like, kind of an issue with the dual mega thing. Then you have Dire Claw scams. Again, if you're looking at Sneasler right here, 54%, that's still a lot of Sneasers clicking Dire Claw. Some of them are playing Gunk Shot, sure, but a lot of them are still playing Dire Claw. And if you get like parried or slept randomly, you can just go home sometimes, which is very painful. I can attest to that. I've lost a day too like that. There's Heat Wave burns. If you notice, some of the best mons are physical attackers. King Gambit, Sneasler, Basque, all physical attackers. If you get a Heat Wave burn on that, GG as well. You have Blizzard freezes because Froslass is like in there. You have Light of Ruin misses. We also saw a really good player losing to a Light of Ruin miss. All of these, by the way, have been happening a bunch on stream. And so when like half your games are robbed like this, you're kind of hoping that as the new mons come out, less of this happens. There will always be some of it. That's variants, that's Pokemon. But this format in particular, really heavily relying on this stuff. Back to the question then, can MB actually fix that? I actually fear that no. So the mons we could get are like these Z Megas, right? Because we've seen the Raichus, so we can assume maybe that we can get some of these. But we don't really know much about these because we don't know the abilities, and the abilities could change absolutely everything. So these are like some of the stronger ones that, you know, because 151 speed is just a lot. Bax's stats are crazy. These guys might be interesting. I mean, there's many others, you know, so that's like something to consider. But like when you look at these, are you actively swapping away from Zard or Floette? I'm not really that sure if you are. And also, like, are you swapping away from King Gambit? Are you swapping away from Baskin Sneasler? I think if you played Reg H, you remember those already being, like, incredibly strong, and Reg H was, like, not the highest power format, but it wasn't super low either. The thing that was going after H in terms of power level was really F, which is the inclusion of legendaries, which is something I don't think we should assume. You know, we are not getting a Landorus, not getting a Raging Bolt or an Urshifu either. And so without those, do we really see this move? I'm not so sure. Again, some things will shift, right? Of course. But we really ideally reduce this list a little bit. And I don't know if these megas can do that. I don't want to be dooming, by the way, because like I love Pokemon. I'm so stoked for Rig MB. You know, I'm stoked to be playing with my Raichu. I don't know if these megas are necessarily going to do it. Don't get me wrong. All of these here, depending on the abilities, could be major. Then there's items. We, again, don't know if there's going to be any items coming. Maybe there will. Some of them might be impactful, some of them might not be. Live Orb might be pretty interesting because like right now your Garchomps, when they face off against each other, it's like I'm going to click Dragon Claw and that will not KO, and they're gonna click Dragon Claw and that will not KO, and so now the partner needs to KO it somehow. My Rock Slide for my Garchomp is never KOing Charizard, so Charizard can pretty safely do this and that. Once you put a Live Orb on that Garchomp, all of that is gone. Yes, the Dragon Claw KOs. Yes, the Rock Slide KOs. And so that's a wholly different game already. But of course, do you want your Garchomp to be stronger? Do you want this 35 to become 50? Maybe, I don't know. I think Garchomp's pretty cool, but yeah. Choice Band, Covert Cloak, you know, there's various items that might shift stuff. Being able to put a Covert Cloak on Whimsicott, for example, would be big. But then again, you're just making Big 6 stronger, right? Definitely interesting what items could change. Assault Vest maybe could reduce Zardwai and Floette's impact. And then there's, of course, other powerhouses of previous formats. Some people are saying, oh, Metagross and Salamence will not be coming yet because they would be too high power. I can definitely see that. On the other hand, imagine if they're not adding these, and at one point they need to be adding normal non-restricted legendaries, and then after that they at one point need to add real big restricted legendaries like the primals and so forth. I don't know how many regulations people are going to be expecting to be playing with megas, but I think we might be getting some higher power stuff sooner rather than later. Not necessarily legendaries, I think that's definitely not happening yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw one or two of these already joining the fray. I would also not be surprised if they're not joining though, don't get me wrong. And then we have the Ursalunas. These were super strong in past formats. Now of course this format is going to be different. You don't have Terra, so your Sneasler can absolutely just blow up your Ursaluna with close combat. You can of course calc for it, but you're still not going to be stoked. You cannot get rid of your fake out problems with Terra Ghost, so that would change a lot about the dynamic of these mons. Rillaboom is something people have been considering because one of the Raichus here, the X, is setting the electric terrain, so people think, oh, we might have Terrain War, so then Rillaboom might come, and Rillaboom might be interesting because suddenly you can fake out cycle with Instant and Rillaboom again, back like the good old days, am I right? But that might actually be pretty good into like stuff like Aerodactyl, because Grassy Glide does at least half or so, which means you're not as afraid of Rock Slide flinching because Rillaboom will always outspeed thanks to that priority on Grassy Glide. Amoonguss might be pretty good to redirect stuff like Sucker Punch without necessarily getting destroyed by Kowtow Cleave in the way Sinistcha does. But then again, is your Amoonguss going to be that great into a Zard Y, which most people seem to be running if you want to be doing well? Similar story for Rillaboom. Zard Y is right there. It's going to blow you up. Dual Wing Beat is going to do a bunch of damage as well. Metagross obviously insane, but can it take a Weather Ball that well? I don't know about that. It can outspeed it, of course, but still. Then there's Salamence. Obviously, Salamence crazy, but can it take Floette moves that well? People tell me you can double edge the Floette, but like Intimidate exists. People are going to intimidate you. Your double edge isn't going to kill. So it kind of feels like the best things that we could possibly get, except for legendaries and Ultra Beasts and Tapus, kind of feel like not necessarily strong enough to deal with these. Then again, Pokemon is so interesting because you can throw one rock into a lake and the ripples completely change everything. So don't get me wrong. I definitely think MB will be different. I'm just not entirely sure how different. Of course, we could get Dondozo. I don't know if I want that. And I also don't know if I actually want Togekiss, honestly. With Serene Grace and all these flinches, like, we don't want more of this, really. But yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. What are you expecting for MB? And what could meaningfully change this format as you're listening to my band's latest song? Link in the description. Pre-save it right now.